Greetings.
Should I put a little more growl into it?
Okay, I came back to, we spent 48 hours making puppets.
Making and breaking hearts, Ellinger.
It's not that kind of podcast.
On a practical level, I have to remember what I was saying on a practical level.
We should have a safe word. Armageddon!
I guess we're maybe semi-proud of that.
Welcome to Hide and Create, your online writing workshop. Hey everybody, we're back with another episode of Hide and Create. Moses Siregar, Diana Rowland, and Jordan Ellinger, and I am Joshua Essoe, coming to you with Generating Conflict this week. How do you generate conflict in your writing? Okay, so unless your character is doing something, you have no plot. Plot comes from your MC, your main character, doing everything he or she can to start to overcome the obstacles standing between them and their goal. Someone has to be hurt and someone has to benefit. I think about making it a bit murky. It doesn't necessarily have to be a black and white issue, or it can be. It doesn't have to be, because that makes things too clear which side is right and which side is wrong, and the story might become a bit predictable. So if it's ambiguous, then there's more mystery as to what might happen. Mystery's good. A reader won't predict what will happen, and thus they'll feel compelled to keep reading. Jordan, how do you handle generating conflict in your own stories?
So, first of all, I just wanted to say that anybody that's really looking for a good example of a work with a lot of conflict should watch the movie In the Loop. One of the easiest ways of generating conflict is to treat dialogue between characters as a battle, right? As all-out war. And that's Aaron Sorkin's advice, who was the screenwriter of The Social Network and The West Wing. It's very interesting. If you watch the first couple of minutes of The Social Network, that's what it is. It's just two characters talking, and it's this battle, right? I mean, you can tell that the main character, Mark Zuckerberg, is doing battle with this woman that he wants to be with, right? And overplays his hand and loses, right? If you can treat every bit of dialogue as a battle, as conflict, as one person trying to defeat the other one with words, you'll make for some really interesting and really engaging conversations. So, I mean, outside of dialogue, a great way to start generating conflict is to have a hook, which is an unanswered question, at the very start of your work, and then have always have at least one unresolved hook. So the pattern, basically, at the very start of your work is you have a hook, and then you have another hook, and then you answer the first hook, right? And then you have another hook, you answer the second hook. You have another hook, you answer the third hook, etc. So there's always a hook that guides the reader through the work. Always have an unanswered
Keeps
question.
pulling you through.
Yeah, always have an unanswered. People, people are down on writers like Dan Brown, but if you look at his works, he rarely finishes a chapter neatly. There's always a cliffhanger. A cliffhanger is a great way of illustrating that hook, answer hook pattern, right? You have a cliffhanger at the end of the chapter, and often you don't immediately answer a cliffhanger at the start of the next chapter, because what you're trying to do is get the reader to read into the middle of the chapter, so that when they're in bed, they're thinking, well, I just have to find out what happens to character XYZ, and so you manage to get them midway into the next chapter, and then they think, well, I only have 3 pages left to go to the end of the chapter. I might as well read that before I go to bed. And then you hit them with another hook, and that's how you end up keeping readers up all night, which my goal as a writer. So that's basically it's very interesting with the hooks. Every chapter, of course. Anne Rice, I read, did something very, very interesting with Interview with the Vampire. She did an experiment where she put not a hook on every chapter, but on every single page. So what I read was interesting, is that they printed the book in a format that differed from her manuscript, and so the hooks were all over the place. They weren't set where she had actually tried to put them, and so the book sales were down. But as soon as they
actually went back and reprinted the book like she had it in her manuscript, setting the hooks back in their appropriate places, readership and sales went up. So that can be a huge drop, obviously. Interesting story, I thought.
Yeah, the concept is scene in sequence. You have a scene, and then you have the sequence, and you basically just you're going to intersperse your plot threads in there. And that helps with your pacing, too. You don't want to have, like, nonstop conflict on one thread, because people will get tired of that. They'll get tired of waiting for a resolution. And so you have to intersperse it and have various threads going with their various hooks. My big thing is a fight scene is not a conflict, and I think a lot of people get confused about that. A fight scene is not a conflict. What causes the fight scene, what brings it on, that's your conflict. And there are any number of types of conflict. You have your emotional conflicts. You have the future consequences. There's internal conflicts, externals. But the point of conflict is to raise the stakes. What does the character have to lose? You raise the stakes, and you raise the stakes as high as you can without, totally losing the belief. And that's what you want to do. You want to raise the stakes so that your reader really gets invested in their story, in what's going on. Have the character have a lot to lose. When I wrote Blood of the Demon, I turned it into my agent, and he sent it back and said, it's not enough. The only thing your main character has to lose is she doesn't solve the mystery. Make it personal. Make something really big happen here. Make it where bad stuff will happen if she doesn't solve the case. And I went back and reworked it and made it a lot more personal, brought in family members, and where the stakes did become very personal, very real, and a lot higher, and it was a much better book for it.
Diana, first of all, I want to disagree with you about the fight scene thing. As a tie-in writer, I've written entire stories that are fight scenes, right? So,
but the fight, but the clash of weapon against weapon, that itself is not the conflict.
Sure,
Something had to cause that fight scene, right?
That's true. I mean, but you can have really long fight scenes, and like the enemy shows up. Sorry.
But still, there's going to be some. It's not just I hit a sword against each other, bam, 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 bam. You're going to have some lulls in there. I mean, and then the next wave of enemies attack.
Yes.
So yeah, you can have that kind of thing, but you do have to have some sort of breaks in there, and there has to be an underlying reason that generates that fight scene, and that's your conflict. We want this land, and you can't have it, kind of thing.
Yeah, no,
whatever.
Absolutely, I agree with that. The other thing that you said about making conflict personal, that's something that appears a lot in Hollywood movies and stuff, and that's the reason that you have, moles in the CIA. In Jack Bauer's the series 24, I think 8 out of 10 of those series, there was a mole inside the counterterrorism unit, right? And it's always about making things personal.
Yeah. Their background checks were terrible.
Yeah, it's the worst organization to work for in the world. But so you have to watch about that specifically. Like, I watch for that in my own writing, that I don't kind of resort to a cheap and easy way of making it personal by always having a mole in the counterterrorism unit or something, right? Like, you can make stories personal without, having the bad guy always be a friend of the good guys, right?
Oh. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is that if your conflict can be resolved by the two characters having a conversation and actually talking, then your conflict sucks. You need a better conflict. I read a book that was doing great. It was a really interesting idea, and it got to the middle, and the main character had thought that someone else had done a terrible thing, and so the two characters meet, and the main character says, "No, I don't want to hear what you have to say," and stormed off, and that was what generated the rest of the book. And I'm like, really? If you just sat there and listened to what he had to say, then the whole second half of the book wouldn't have mattered. And it made me stop reading that author's books, because it was too cheap. It's too easy. It's easy to make conflict more realistic. And now I'm going to let Moses talk, because he's been very patient.
So I think one of the absolute ground rules we're establishing here before we go on to anything of a higher nature is that conflict is the absolute driving force and most compelling, the thing that makes fiction compelling, and you want to have conflict in your story as many ways as you can, as many places as you can have it, not to tire your readers out, but to make the work compelling. Everything can't be
absolutely
all out all the time, you got to be aware of that sort of pacing issue. But yeah, it's critical. And like Diana was saying, there's inner and there's outer conflict. I think the most important place to focus is the inner conflicts, because you want to have those compelling characters that also tie the reader to the story. You have to start with compelling inner conflicts for your major characters, and definitely look at your stories and say, do I have enough of that? Is that rich enough? Is that deep enough? If it's not there, then you can do better. And not to bring it back to my own work, but as I thought about this, I think this is interesting, because I have characters that have their internal conflicts. Then the story is a story of war. So the larger story is a story of war between nations. And then I guess I had a third level of conflict, which is that basically you have protagonists on both sides of the war. So there's another level of conflict, which is that the characters are at war with each other. And you feel conflict because you want them both to win, but you know that probably some of them have to die. And so that's just a little trick that I use, is that you have characters that you care for actually at cross purposes to each other, because then the reader is conflicted, on top of all of that. And then the new work that I'm writing, I put out this preview of it, which is The Children of Wind and Wood, and I did focus on 3 characters and their internal conflicts even more than before. And I think that's one part of that I'm proud of, is that, I really, really want to establish these characters and specifically, their internal conflicts, and really go into, enriching that sort of thing. And I just want to say it to be really, to be repetitive for just a moment. That is going to be the key to having a compelling story.
Can you talk a little bit about the differences between internal and external conflict, Moses, just for our listeners who may not know?
Well, if you have, again, you have a war story. So obviously you have an external conflict, that drives the story. Or, you have, let's say you have a protagonist and an antagonist, and, the superhero is trying to overcome the villain. I mean, that's an external conflict. It's a conflict between players in the story. But what is that hero going through to do that? What does he have to give up? What does he have to surrender? What does he have to overcome? Does he have to betray someone? Does he have to betray himself? Does he have to betray his nation? What makes the hero conflicted as he goes about doing what he has to do? I think any story is going to be richer, for that.
It'd be like the cop who, he knows who the killer is, but the only way to get the evidence is by dirty means. And so there's going to be internal conflict there. It's like, does he do the illegal thing to get this guy, or does he go by the book, and that sort of thing? But yeah, agree.
So the external conflict in that would be what? That he needs to...
The external conflict is him against the bad guy. Okay, chasing down the killer. The internal is how should he go about it? Should he do it by the book and possibly lose the conviction, or should he do it not by the book and lose his ethical stance, or still possibly lose conviction? How should he go about doing it? Should he beat up the suspect? That sort of thing.
One of the first things I learned from Michael Stackpole when I was learning how to just start writing novels was, he said, he has this exercise, 21 days to a novel, and you do 21 different things on 21 different days. And one of those was, you're basically, if I recall correctly, you're tracing the character arc, the growth for the character over the story. And, if it's a series, you may have one character who does one growth arc in one story, and then you may have a major character who does a big growth arc over 7, books. So characters can have growth arcs of different lengths, but so that your character arc is often about, overcoming some sort of internal issue, some sort of internal conflict that they have. And that's one of the things that makes novels really wonderful. When you see a character, you watch them grow and you watch them overcome a personal issue, while going through the motions of the external conflict, that is basically the plot of the story.
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting in tie-in fiction, because with that internal conflict, you have to have internal conflict in your stories, or at least a good story does have one. But you have multiple authors writing the same character. So like with the Gotrix and Felix series in Warhammer, I think there's been 8 authors or something that have written stories starring them. And it's interesting because you can tell the authors that haven't read the rest of the series, they don't know some of the internal... After your character grows after solving internal conflict. So when an author hasn't read the rest of the books in the series and they don't know all those internal conflicts that that character has grappled with, it feels fake. It feels like that character is a stunted version of themselves because there's so much growth that happens in the midst of that internal conflict.
I want to talk a little bit more about the mechanics for just a minute here. The way I look at it, there are three types of conflict, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit. There's interior, there's exterior, and there's romantic, right? So what is interior? Interior conflict is Jake. We'll say it's Jake. Jake against Jake. He's got conflicting desires, and he has to work through those. For example, let's say maybe Jake secretly loves a girl. He wants her more than anything, but it's his pastor's wife. Let's escalate that. Let's say that Jake is a knight. Sir Jake. Sir Jake is in love with the high priest's wife, right? Okay, so there you have a basic interior conflict, and we have taken what was sort of a basic concept and then made it deeper, made it more dangerous. There could be all kinds of internal conflict with that situation. There's his morals, duty, sense of honor, loyalty, religious beliefs. Okay, so that's interior. Exterior conflict is Jake against the world, or a piece of that world, like Dana said, the villain. Then the third, romantic conflict. Romantic conflict is a little bit handled in this scenario, but romantic conflict would be Jake against his love interest. Pretty easy once you get the hang of it, and bam! There you have your story, rife with layers of conflict. The more you think about stuff, the more unique and interesting your details will get. So go write that.
and also good to remember that external conflict does not have to be from your enemies. External conflict can be from your allies. It's like my cop's commander is pressuring him. He needs to close the case because there's a lot of other things he can't spend all his time on here. Pressure from the district attorney's office and stuff like that. So it doesn't have to just be conflict from your enemies. It's anything that makes your hero or heroine's life a little bit harder for them to reach their goal. Also, you have to look at how realistic things are. The actions of your characters against this conflict. Would your hero really have this particular reaction to this conflict? Ask about the situation. Is the situation desperate enough to make the character do whatever they do? Does this conflict move the story forward? I think that's a big one. You have a story, your characters have goals. Does this conflict move the story forward, or are you just throwing conflict in there just to throw conflict in there, which is okay sometimes, but if you do it too much, you're going to muddle things up. And the biggest thing is, why should your reader care what happens next, and why should your reader care what happens to the characters? So you have to start it all out with compelling story, compelling characters, and then throw all the stuff in their way and make the reader want to know what happens next.
Conflict. We should have a fight right now. Yeah. Conflict up in here. Make this podcast more interesting.
Yeah, well, we can have verbal battles or something, dialogue as a battle. But I think
actually,
can it be rap? Jordan, can we have rap battles?
Rap battle.
I actually heard from a listener who said one of the things they liked about our show is that we disagreed sometimes. So there you go.
Yeah, all right, cool. There you go. Yeah, no,
conflict.
You're wrong. You're totally wrong.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dana, we were saying one of the things that one of my big pet peeves is starting, and you see this quite a lot in fantasy as an editor, as an acquiring editor. I see this often in submissions. Is that somebody will start their fantasy short story immediately with a battle, like right in the middle of a battle. And what they think they're doing is in media res. They think that because they're starting in the middle of a battle, they're generating conflict, and that will be enough to hook the reader. But the
reader doesn't know why the battle's there, so it's pointless.
Exactly. See, they don't have it. They're not invested in any of the characters, right? So they don't care. They don't even know which side they should cheer from. I mean, unless you kind of drop in, oh, this guy was wearing gleaming white armor and this guy was wearing black armor, which is very cheap.
No, all you got to do is you got to pause the battle, have the main character like save a puppy, and then we know who to care about.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So I think that part of conflict is making conflict doesn't work unless the readers care about the results of that conflict.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So the opposition of your main character doesn't always actually have to be evil, though, either. I alluded to that in the very beginning of the show, in the opening of the show. The opposition to the character just merely has to have a compelling reason to stop the main character or oppose the main character. And as a side note, I would make sure that the opposition is stronger than your MC. Otherwise, it just might not be that interesting.
Well, I disagree with that right there. What about Robocop? Right? I mean, what you have to do if you're
I'm sorry. What about Robocop?
well, no, I'm just saying as an example, Robocop is, or Superman. People like to rag on Superman a lot because he's indestructible.
But he has his weaknesses. He does have his weaknesses, though, and that's the thing. I mean, you don't. If your character is so strong that he doesn't have any weakness, and that he's going to solve the case and all this other stuff, without any effort, without getting beaten up or anything like that. Well, this is boring. You don't care. It's like, okay, great. Skip to the end. Who's the bad guy? Great. Yeah, your character can be super strong, but even Robocop and even Superman still had weak spots that their opponents utilized.
Yeah, but the biggest weak spot
remember
of all
in the beginning, the guy who became Robocop was just utterly annihilated. I'd say his opposition was a bit stronger than him, and then at the end, his opposition was still stronger. Remember that the giant killer robot that he had to fight was stronger than him. The only reason that he won is through intellect.
But Robocop, most of the conflict there is internal.
Exactly,
it's
that's
him
what I was going to say.
remembering who he was. Yeah. So
like
it really doesn't matter about the external so much. Most of the conflict in that is internal, of him remembering who he was, what kind of cop he was, and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
there is external conflict, but if the internal conflict wasn't there, it would be a very boring movie.
Yeah, what people don't realize about Superman, right, is that it's not a comic book about how many different ways can you kill Superman with kryptonite. It's about who around Superman will die, or how Superman will suffer internally, right? So the stronger your protagonist is in comparison to the antagonist, the more your conflict must be moved internal, right? Because there's less external conflict because Superman can generally pound on whoever, right? But there's more, like Brainiac is a perfect example of that. Brainiac isn't that strong, he's just very smart, and he just figures out ways to trap Superman into these compelling internal conflicts, right? It's always about, can Superman save the Earth, not will Superman die, right?
So to back up what Josh was saying a little bit, though, I think maybe it's true that the opposition has to be stronger than the the protagonist, at least on some level, at least some of the time. There has to be that strength coming from the opposition to give the hero a challenge. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
No, I mean I can see that. I guess if you don't define strength as being physical strength, if they have some hold, like the hostage taker has over the police officer, right? The hostage taker might be a terrible shot. He is not wearing bulletproof armor or whatever, but he's rendered stronger because of the internal conflict of the cop thinking, "Oh, I can't shoot this guy because there's a hostage in the way."
Yeah, and so the hostage taker, his position is stronger than the hero in the sense that he's got a gun to the hostage, and that is his advantage. He has to have advantages.
Yeah, that's an internal conflict from the police officer, though, right? The police officer is stronger than the hostage taker. He might have body armor, he's an excellent shot, years of training, etc., etc., etc. So what the hostage taker is doing is generating internal conflict in the police officer by having a hostage.
No, I mean, I would say the hostage taker is the hostage taker is stronger in that situation, despite the training of the protagonist. Because the hostage taker has the gun to the hostage's head. Like in that situation, he's stronger. His bargaining position is stronger. It's just there has to be that. You got to be up against something, and it's got to be something difficult.
Sure, I can.
Yeah, it's got to be something strong, something that the main character can't just walk away from, right? Because if he can walk away from it and say, "Screw this mess, I'm out of here," then why doesn't he just do that? And readers will wonder that. Why doesn't he just walk away? This is so easy,
right? That's the going to is this a realistic action?
Yeah.
There's
got to be a strong enough reason. Yeah, for him to be challenged and for him to stick around, and so the stakes have to be high. We're running a bit low on time now, so I'd like to go to final thoughts if everybody's cool with that. I guess so. I guess by the crickets, that means yes, we're ready to go for final thoughts, Josh. All right, Diana, go.
Just remember, conflict is what drives your story and makes it interesting. Your conflict needs to be realistic. It needs to move your story forward, and the reactions to the conflict need to be realistic. You want characters to turn the pages. That is what it's all about, is getting characters to keep reading your book.
Okay, awesome.
Conflict.
Moses?
Conflict.
Awesome. Complex, but they'll get it. Jordan?
I once read a quote from a famous agent. I'm not going to say the name because I'm not exactly sure who to attribute it to, but he said that what he would do is he would take a manuscript and drop it on the floor and then pick up a random page, and if that page didn't have conflict on it, he would reject the manuscript. Right? So it's really, really important to always have conflict, and you can achieve that through dialogue, through just putting your character in a complex situation that they might not be able to navigate emotionally, or they might not be able to navigate physically, like in a fight, right? Diana is right in saying that combat isn't conflict, it's the result of conflict. Right? But you can have conflict even within a fight. Like if you're writing tie-ins and you have to write a chapter-long fight scene, you can put conflict into that fight scene by having reinforcements show up, or having...
or the sergeant who doesn't know what he's doing, or something like that, or the rookie who throws his grenade the wrong way. Yeah.
Exactly. So always... You know, like if anybody's seen Glengarry Glen Ross, that's another example of dialogue as combat. But Alec Baldwin, he says it's the ABCs: always be closing, right? As a writer, always be conflicting, and that's about it for me.
Okay, I think that know your villain, know your conflict is just a final note. A lot of stories I see have a lot of cardboard villains. They're one-dimensional villains. They don't frighten anyone. And worse, they don't intrigue anyone. So here are a couple of leading questions that you could ask of your antagonist that might flesh him out a little bit. What does he believe in? Or she. Let's say it's, because I know there are a lot of evil women out there too.
Well, they don't even have to be evil. They just have to have a goal that conflicts with your main character's goal. But yeah, it has to be realistic.
What about our realistic female antagonist? Why does she feel justified in what she wants or in what she's opposing? Through the antagonist's eyes, how would the world be a better place if what they want happens? Assume that the antagonist is correct. What support can you find for him? Religious or her? Religious, philosophical, practical. A fun little exercise that you can do if you're having trouble with your antagonist is to create a character who supports that antagonist, is like, you know, the mini-me for that antagonist, and write the case for that antagonist's viewpoint from that little character's point of view. And that'll just give you some extra insight.
I really like that one. You could even put that character into the actual story itself.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be just a writing exercise. So bonus points for extra conflict if your protagonist realizes some point in the book or the story that the antagonist was right all along. Bum, bum, bum. So with that, you can add conflict through setting, theme, and character. Go do that. We will be back next week with another awesome conflicting show, hopefully with more argument, to keep you guys entertained. Have a good one.
This has been another episode of Hide and Create. The show is produced by me, Jordan Ellinger. The site is edited by Joshua Essoe, and your co-hosts have been Diana Rowland and Moses Siregar. That music that you're listening to was written by Jason Donnelly. We can be reached at writingpodcastonline.com, where you can ask us questions and suggest topics for future shows. Thank you for listening. Now go hide and create something.